Good morning. Morning, everyone. We had a great first day yesterday of the conference, and today we have a half day. So to give you a chance to really enjoy this beautiful resort, today should be a nice, warm, sunny day. I take personal credit for that. So, welcome to day 2 of NITOP. So we're going to have our first participant idea exchange today at 10:15. And remember, if you're a NITOPist presenter, please remember the speaker meeting at 12:30 today in the grand ballroom. So today lunch is on your own. We have no afternoon sessions planned. But remember, if you sign up for dinners tonight, you need to make sure that you have arranged for your transportation. And then don't forget, tonight is game night. So there's no structure to that. Just come, if you want, bring whatever games you have. We'll have some games there, and it's just self-organizing. Good time with your colleagues. That's tonight at 8 p.m. in the Sky Lounge, which is on the top floor of the main building. So, and also one other thing: it's not too late to submit for Laugh at Lunch for tomorrow, if you'd like that. Our speaker this morning is Dr. Claude Steele. Dr. Steele is a renowned social psychologist whose work has been highly influential in research, teaching, and college administration. He is currently a professor of psychology at Stanford. He is best known for his work on stereotype threat, summarized in his book Whistling Vivaldi and Other Clues to How Stereotypes Affect Us. He has served as provost at both Columbia and UC Berkeley. He's received numerous awards and recognitions and multiple honorary doctorates. His latest book is Churn, The Tension That Divides Us and How to Overcome It. We are so pleased that he could make time to speak here at NITOP. The title of his talk is The Tension That Divides Us and How to Overcome It. Please welcome Dr. Steele.
Now you can, it works. Thank you and good morning. It's a real pleasure and an honor to be here. I feel like I've spent most of my life teaching psychology. And continuing that theme tomorrow morning, our school starts cruelly on Monday, so I have to get back to teach tomorrow morning. So it's a great pleasure to be here. I wish I could stay a lot longer than I'm going to be able to, but it's a pleasure to be here. What I want to talk to you about is a question that arises from my research past on stereotype threat and related issues, but also my experience as an administrator and as a teacher. And the basic question is, how do you make diversity in specific settings? How do you make it work so that people feel that they can contribute and engage and participate from the standpoint of their identities and backgrounds and who they are, and yet not be discriminated against based on those identities and backgrounds and who they are? That would be sort of a thumbnail description of what perhaps successful diversity would look like. I'm really interested in specific settings. I'm not so interested in the question of all of society, how you would make it work in a big multiracial, multi-ethnic society. I think maybe we've overlooked the potential of particular settings, the settings in which we actually live our lives. If we can make it work there, perhaps it would generalize to the broader society. But as a social psychologist, I feel like I can only get my head around particular concrete settings: classrooms, workplaces, military units, basketball teams, places like that, where we do come together as a diverse society. The question I recognize is relatively new. Just in the interest of history, we weren't really interested until the 60s and civil rights passages and the Supreme Court decisions that committed our society to a genuinely integrated society, a society in which opportunity and resources, the allocation of those things would not be affected by identity. That is an explicit commitment that we made in that period of our history. I always think we should pat ourselves on the back for that. That I don't know of another society that has gotten to that point. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm sure a historian would say, wait a minute. But it feels that way to me. Like that's one of the distinctive things about life in America. That's our big experiment. Can you make a multiracial, multi-ethnic democracy really work and bring the advantages of that without the disadvantages? So it is a relatively new question. Most of our institutions, our major organizations, and the traditions from which they come, most of those things were in place long before our society had that commitment. And for that reason, one way of characterizing the last 60 or 70 years is to say that we're trying to sort of catch up with that commitment. We're trying to find a way to make it work, to implement it. We've tried a lot of different things to do that. And we obviously have a ways to go. You can't really reverse, re-engineer, whatever the term is, a whole society in an eye blink. But it has been a very vivid project in all of our lives over this period of time. And I think, for that reason, there has been a kind of tug of war, so to speak. That's how I kind of experience it, between the forces and pressures to expand opportunity, to achieve this goal, this aspiration of an integrated society. But it's also been resisted. So there has been, and we're in an era right now, obviously, of considerable resistance, maybe as much resistance as I've ever felt in my long life. So I'm not naive to that kind of pressure. I'm just trying to locate the thinking that I want to unravel here in a larger societal, historical context of what the American project is. I don't think it's a minor project. I don't think it's just a psychology project. I think it's one of the major issues in our society. We have had a way of dealing with it. I should say at the outset that the talk's going to have two parts, at least in my mind. I code them that way. The first part is as a psychologist, what do you say about this? What is the challenge of diversity? What makes it difficult, or what makes it a challenge? And then I'm going to come to a proposal, at any rate, and try to take us through that and illustrate what that would look like. So the first part of the talk can be a little dark, because it is a kind of frank discussion of what American society and history have left us with. But keep in mind, the light is coming, or at least some hope is coming toward the end. As I say, we have had a way of achieving this. I remember when this way emerged in the 60s. It was a progressive idea, and at that time, color blindness, identity blindness. Here's what we'll do. We've had this pass, but we'll get past it by being colorblind and by treating people and seeing them as individuals, not as members of groups, not in terms of their group identities and so forth. We'll be blind to that, and we'll treat everybody as individuals. That's the offer on the table. We will promise to be colorblind, and your responsibility is to kind of assimilate to the mainstream pretty much as fast as you can, and that's how we're going to accomplish this big transformation of society. It's the basic offer we've made to immigrant groups over the centuries and decades, so we'll use it here too. And there are many parts of society that we want to be colorblind, that in a genuinely fair, multiracial, multi-ethnic society, things have to be. Policing, we want to be colorblind. Access to medical care, access to mortgage capital. You've got the whole list of things that we don't want to mess with that. We don't want to mete that out based on identity, as we have in the past. We want to get away from that. So I think there is an essentialness to colorblindness at certain aspects of our society, and I want to acknowledge that. But at the same time, I think it has had we've paid a price for it, and that is a kind of insensitivity. We've lost sight of the significance that our identities have for us in our lives. When you say, I'm not going to see identity, when I say that, I'm going to, lose sight of what you have to deal with because you have a particular identity. It's going to seem like that's not important, or that's irrelevant, or we should forget that, or we should not pay attention to that in some way. And yet many of the conditions of life and circumstances that we have to deal with are tied to our identities, our racial identities, our ethnic identities, our gender, our sexual orientation identities. The list goes on, as we know. Experiences that I have to deal with tied to those things. We have used identity to organize society really from the outset. As the old world met the new world, so to speak, we used identity to decide who would be in the social contract and who would be outside the social contract, who could be enslaved, whose lands could be appropriated, who could vote, who could not vote. We've paid a lot of it. We've used it a lot to organize society, and that organization and its legacy is still quite much, quite with us. You just look at how schooling and communities are organized around identities. So the ideal that we're just a set of individuals is, I think, as I say, useful and important, an important commitment in many aspects of life, but it can desensitize us to this. I've been using the example of a George Floyd, for example. We see him at the tragic end of his life ostensibly trying to pass a counterfeit bill in a bodega on the corner, but we don't see the whole life, and we don't see the role that his identities may have played in the evolution of a life to that point. Born in inner city Houston and to a low-income family, the oldest child, his mother's working several jobs. He's got responsibility for taking care of the younger kids and cooking and managing them. There's no real time to prepare George for school. When George gets to school, he's going to go to one of the least well-funded, with teachers who are the least well-trained, with the harshest disciplinary practices. If he gets in trouble outside of school, we know he's going to be met with a harsh criminal justice system. These are all conditions of life. The term I've been using over the years to capture this are identity contingencies. These are things tied to his identity, things he has to cope with. Not because he's an individual, but because of his racial and class identity in society. And that is a very profound reality for him that he has to cope with. And if we as in our institutions and in our relations, if we're going to be strictly, fundamentalistically, I can make up a term, committed to colorblindness, we're going to miss that, and we're not going to address that. And that void, I think, is incredibly important at this point in recognizing in our society the need for, especially our institutions. I'm going to talk more about it later, to address that, to address the real needs that people have. If we want this kind of society to succeed, I think that is a sensitivity we need to get a lot more, that deserves a lot more attention. As a social psychologist, I am also impressed with social psychological contingencies of identity, conditions of life that one has to deal with because of identity, of the identity one has. Stereotype threat would be an example of such a contingency. It's a very simple kind of pressure in life that when you're in a situation or you're doing something for which a negative stereotype about one of your identities, it could be your race, your age, your social class, it could be a whole bunch of things, but when you're in a situation where a negative stereotype about one of your identities is relevant, you know at some level that you could be treated, judged in terms of that stereotype. And if the situation is important, if it's not important, you're just on the subway, who cares? But if you're in a classroom, you're in a doctor's office, you're in a car pulled over by a policeman, The prospect of being seen and treated in terms of a negative stereotype about one of your identities can be profound. It can be incredibly distracting. It can interfere with your functioning right there in the immediate situation. And it can interfere with your interest in a whole walk of life where you think you might be subjected to that kind of pressure. So it's a simple thing, but it can have, under the right conditions, a profound effect. Most of the research on it over the last 30 years has focused on its effects on performance, academic performance, athletic performance, how well women negotiate, women's driving behavior, a whole bunch of things that have been looked at. I'm not interested today in talking so much about that. We can come back to it if you're interested. I'm using the concept of stereotype threat or identity threat as a way of getting at what's difficult about diversity, what the challenge of diversity is. I'll tell you a story that I think, that illustrates what I'm talking about. This is imagine a parent-teacher conference. This is how the book Churn starts out, with a prologue of this story. Parent-teacher conference. The parents and student involved are African American, and the teacher involved is white. And, you can imagine the African American parents getting in their car, driving across town or to the school to talk to this teacher about their child. And for them, this is a big deal. This is a chance they know the stereotypes about African Americans. They know them, and they worry that their child is going to be seen in terms of them, and that the teacher and the school won't invest in developing their child's abilities as much as maybe other children, that they could be deprioritized in that setting, and that maybe, he's going to be seen as a potential athlete, or, a mild transgression would be interpreted as a real disorder of some sort, that the stereotypes are going to affect how their child is seen and treated, and this is so important to them. So they're talking this over. What kind of teacher is this? Is this teacher a good teacher? Is this teacher a teacher that's, insistently colorblind? And what are we going to deal with here? Let's don't jump to race right away. Let's don't do that. Let's be careful. Let's, try to set up a conversation. But they go into that meeting full of what I'm calling churn, concern about how their identity and their child's identity is going to play out in this situation, what it's going to mean for them. That's what I mean by the term churn, just the term to capture this psychological experience of being in that kind of situation. And the teacher, for her part, has probably an equally virulent form of stereotype threat in there. She believes, look, I'm doing the best I can under the circumstances. I try to be especially sensitive to the needs of my minority students, my low-income students. I really want to see them succeed, and I really try to do everything I can to make that happen. But how am I going to convey that to these parents here? And I know that if I just make even the slightest negative comment about the student, I could be seen as a racist. The stereotype about her identity that is relevant in that important situation. So she can feel a considerable pressure and tension in that situation. She too is in churn. Both parties are in heavy churn. And it's not so much because we're talking about prejudicial attitudes, that they hold prejudicial. That's kind of irrelevant here. This would happen no matter what their attitudes were. This is American history coming down into the circumstances of everyday life and affecting us. Their identities mean something in this society. In a different society, maybe race would not be so, wouldn't mean the same thing, just wouldn't have the same history tied to it that would undermine, and this is where I sort of get to the bottom of my dark argument, this circumstance makes it difficult for us to trust each other, to just grant trust, to open up and trust. That's what's psychologically difficult. There's a tension there between remembering and forgetting. I'm borrowing this is from Ishiguro, the Japanese English author, Nobel Prize winner in literature, has this distinction between the tension between remembering and forgetting, and I think it's a great way of capturing the essence of churn. That do I remember in this situation how my group is seen and treated? Do I remember that? Or do I just forget that? Act like that's over? Do I just trust the situation? It's a good way of capturing what's hard about it, what's difficult. In a diverse situation, that's the circumstance of all of us. Diversity gives us all identities. When I'm with my own group, so to speak, in a more homogeneous group, I'm with older people. Oh, what, they're going to stereotype me about my age? They're just as bad off as I am. Well, I don't feel the same stereotype or image pressure in that situation. But when I come together with younger people, they could see me that way. They could think, this guy doesn't know anything about his telephone, for example. I just spent the holidays with my 16-year-old grandsons. I mean, wow, do they look down on me for these things. So you feel that, and it makes you feel different. You don't feel as empowered or as, it kind of, it's a reality. So enough on that. I think you sort of get what the heart of the argument I'm making. Here's an experiment, I think, which demonstrates it very vividly and poignantly. This is an experiment that Jeff Cohen and Lee Ross and I did some years ago, asking the question, how does a white teacher, professor, give critical feedback to a black student and have that feedback be trusted? Trusted. So we had students come in one at a time, white and black, Stanford students, and we said, we'd like you to write an essay about your favorite teacher, and if that essay is really good, we'll publish it in a new magazine that we're starting on campus on teaching. And put your best foot forward and come back in 2 days, and we'll give you feedback on that essay. And of course, when they come back in 2 days and get feedback on the essay, what we're interested in is, do they trust the feedback? How much do they trust it? How much do they use it to improve their essays? And what we vary is how we give the feedback when they come back 2 days later. And to what we expected, but is nonetheless a very unsettling finding, is that when you give the feedback straightforwardly, here's the feedback on your essay, or you give the feedback with a little note of affirmation up front, which we faculty tend to do when we're giving critical feedback. I love the energy you bring to my class. Here's your D. See you later. That don't work either. What we found is that for the white students, that was fine. They trusted the feedback. They were happy to get feedback on an essay from an adult in the environment. They're perfectly happy about that. So they trusted. But the black students didn't. They trusted it considerably less. And it's not obvious. These are privileged students. They're at a university that is very committed to their progress and their development and all those things. They're enjoying a lot of advantages. You would think that they would be ready to trust, but they weren't. And when you think about it, you can see why, in terms of the argument I'm laying out here, is that they don't know whether the feedback is coming from their essay or from the feedback giver's opinions of their group's abilities. Maybe it's coming from the stereotype about my group. I don't know for sure. I just don't know. And not knowing, I got to be vigilant. I got to stay in churn. I'm in churn. I'm worried. I'm trying to figure this out. What does this mean? I'm looking for clues. I'm talking to other people who share my identity to figure out what the hell they think about the situation. I'm in a real predicament that is tied to my identity, which is tied to the way my identity has been structured into this society and into this culture and into our ways of thinking about things. It can seem very Delphic and in the air, stereotype threat or image threat, but actually it comes down to be a very personal, powerful experience in a situation like this. They're committed to succeeding in this society and to doing the best they can, but they're in this predicament with regard to it that makes it difficult for them to trust what in this instance was valuable feedback. And you can imagine this is just one little situation we've captured in an experiment, but this is a condition of life for them in a society like ours, in an integrated society. They're going to be, that's going to be a common experience, getting feedback like that from people with a different identity in a situation, and being thrown into a predicament of doubt and worry and churn. Okay, that's the dark part. I think churn has an antidote to it. Not an anecdote, but an antidote. It has its, what is that stuff that's Superman? Kryptonite. I think churn has a kryptonite. And I think the kryptonite is trust. And I think it's an experience that is close to all of us, that many of us have had that experience where we do trust people of different identities. I think it happens all the time. It doesn't happen enough, but I think it's something that's within us. Once you trust the person, then you don't worry about that. If I knew, if the African American parents knew the teacher and they were friends and they'd had a chance to develop a relationship and all that, they might be really interested in what the teacher had to say without that, and the teacher might not be at all worried about being seen as a racist in that situation. I think the structure of the dark structure I've outlined is definitely in place in a society like this. But I think down on the ground of everyday life, there are remedies, and that we know how to do it. That's where I get hopeful about this situation. It isn't just, I don't want to just leave it as an abstract critical analysis of what is difficult between us. I think there's something really hopeful available to us that maybe we haven't realized as much, and that's what the book Churn tries to develop as much as possible, is a sketch at any rate of what that would look like, both at the level of individuals, me with other individuals, at that level, at the level of sort of moderate-sized settings like classrooms and workplaces and so on, and at the level of bigger institutions, which I've thought a lot about. So I'm going to just go down that pathway at this point, and describe what I mean like that, to illustrate this kryptonite and how it might work to overcome this tension that can divide us in a society like ours. First, at the level of individuals, how do we develop relationships across identity divides? Many of us have had experiences like that. So your guess in some ways could be as good as mine. How do you do it? What happened? Why don't you feel that tension with those people? What's at the root of that? Irving Goffman, a sociologist, he did an ethnography of gay life in my city, San Francisco, in the 1950s, when gay life was incredibly stigmatized. He's looking at the experience of a stigmatized group, and he found that gay men of that era had a term for straight people who they accepted, who they thought, who saw their full humanity. They could see, these were people who could see around that stigma to see that they were full human beings. And the gay men of that era called such people wise. They're wise. He's wise. Black people have a ton of these terms. He's cool. He's cool, man. That means don't worry about it. He's not going to see you that way. He knows we're fully human. Okay, so you can relax on that front. If somebody is not wise, then maybe their perceptions are going to be shaped by stereotypes and group images and that sort of thing. But you're kind of looking for that from the standpoint of that one of those identities, those negatively stereotyped, stigmatized identities. You're looking for people who are wise, who can see around that. In the book, I have a whole ton of stories about relationships. Gil Evans and Miles Davis, these are two great jazz musicians. I think they made some of the most beautiful jazz of the 20th century, for sure. Miles Davis's cool horn in these classical orchestral arrangements. It's just beautiful music. Anyway, these are two guys that, Miles Davis is a cool, hard-edged African-American jazz musician with a great sense of propriety over that art form and a worry about employment for jazz musicians. So how would he ever become friends with this tall, skinny white guy from Canada who shows up in New York jazz clubs eating radishes out of a brown paper bag? I mean, this guy was square, man. And yet Miles Davis said he was the coolest dude, man. One of the coolest people I've ever met. He was my greatest friend. Miles died not long after Gil Evans died. They were just that close. So how does that happen? This bridging these identity divides. There is a third condition of that experiment that Jeff Cohen and Lee Ross and I did, which illustrates at least one way that it happens. In that condition, giving feedback to the students about their essays that they had written, this time, in that condition, the feedback giver said to them something like this: look, we're using really high standards in evaluating your essay. Because we might publish them in this magazine, so we're using really high standards. But I've looked at your essay, and I think you can meet those standards. Here's the feedback. Wow. When that happened, the black students trusted that feedback way more than the students in any other condition of the experiment. 3 times more of them took the essay home to use that feedback to improve the essay than in any of the other conditions of the experiment. So it's as if this appetite to trust is there all along. It just needed a signal that they're not going to be seen in terms of how they worry about being seen in that situation. We're using high standards. He wouldn't say that if he thought we were stupid. And I've read your essay, and I think you can meet that high standard. Wow, that kind of advice, I think, if we look at our lives, can take us in a direction. Well, if they feel that way, then I'm going this way. It can be incredibly transformative feedback like that. And it's a perfect example of what needs to happen in order for a relationship across identity divides to form. It helps a trust unfold at the base of that relationship. Oh, this person's on my side. He's cool, man. He's wise. So I think that's what has to happen. The formula, I think, if I could reduce it to that just for the trying to be as clear as possible, is that we have to give some signal that we see their full humanity, that we see full humanity and potential in difference. In difference. It's easy to see it in similarity. It's harder to see it in difference as humans. It just is. And that's the extra step, I think, in a multiracial, multi-ethnic society like the one we have. We have to learn how to make. I think education has an awful lot of responsibility for training us as citizens into that kind of a mindset. But I think it's essential. It's a basic. I don't think it's something we have an option about. I think if we don't do that, then we're locked into these identities, into the strife and mistrust that is otherwise going to be a permanent feature of our society. But I think the hopefulness rests in the fact that I think it works, and I think that a lot of us have experience in our lives with that working and for us. So. That's what I can say. I can elaborate a lot. If you see a lot more research, there's one study that's really, I think, useful to point out here. This is a study that I did with Phil Goff. Phil Goff was the leader on this study some years back, in which we had white guys come into the laboratory and we told them they were going to have a conversation with two other students, and that's what the experiment was about, was how they related to each other. And as they sat down, they saw in front of them photographs of the two students they were going to have the conversation with. And lo and behold, for half of them, the two photographs were of two white guys, and for the other half, the photographs were of two black guys. And then they learned that they were going to either talk about love and relationships, which students can talk to anybody about, or they were going to talk about racial profiling. And then the experimenter says, look, I'm going to go down the hall and get your two conversation partners and bring them back. And while I'm going, would you arrange the chairs in the room here for the conversation? And of course, the dependent measure is how close do they put the chairs together? How do they position themselves for this conversation? And what you might expect to happen, indeed happened, when they were going to talk to two white guys about anything, they put the three chairs close together. When they were going to talk to two black guys about love and relationships, they put the chairs very close together. But when they were going to talk to two black guys about racial profiling, a distance emerged. So what would be wise in that situation? What would enable them in that conversation to bring the chairs close together? And we tried a lot of things that came from the general wisdom of the day, diversity trainings of various sort. Often, a lot of them, none of them really worked, and some of them backfired, made it worse, put the huge distance between themselves and the other person, you know. Once you raise the prospect that I'm prejudiced and you bring me, I'm in such churn, such intense churn, that that the last thing I'm worried about is connecting to this person. So I'm defending myself, my decency, my morality. So we told them instead, seeing this, look, nobody knows how to have this kind of a conversation. It's difficult in big part because of American history and so on. And the thing to do here is to develop a curiosity about the experience of other people. Rely on that. When in doubt, ask questions. Don't make speeches. Don't try to prove you're not prejudiced. Don't say things that make you look innocent. You know, those are all going to be red flags. The thing to do is develop a genuine interest in the other human being, to see who they are, and to convey that to them. And with that instruction, in that difficult conversation, white guy talking to two black guys about racial profiling, they moved the chairs in very close. They were as anxious to have that conversation, to get around that stereotype pressure as anybody in that. The desire to relate was there. The thing that was preventing it from happening is the pressure, the stereotype pressure, the anxiety, that's the churn that's forced into the middle of the situation. So when that is remedied, when that meets a kryptonite with a simple mindset, just be curious. Don't be judgmental. Ask questions. Learn. Take it as an opportunity. Man, and on both sides, that works dramatically. Both sides. You see that coming at you, you relax too. It creates a trust. So, okay, just a few images there. I'm not going to take as much time with the next category, mid-size, like our classrooms, because I think there's such a big literature there about the effects that cues can have. I think of one that comes to mind, Sapna Sharian and a team of students at Stanford did a very simple study about women in computer science majors. So they doctored up a room, a waiting room, to look like it was a computer science nerd had been there with all these kind of gothic things in the room and Coke cans and bad health debris and so on, versus a room that was, had pictures of nature and, so that you're filling out this questionnaire in one of those rooms or another, and you're asked, how interested are you in computer science? And sure enough, when you're in a room with this sort of nerd-designed room, women were not as interested in a career in computer science. So something like that, they would have no sense that that's important to them. But what it's signaling to them, and the research is so extensive on this, I'm slow to consider things definitive in science, but there's just overwhelming evidence that, that you could avoid a whole path of life, a whole career path, because you just don't feel comfortable there. And what is it that you don't feel comfortable about? You know, how am I going to be judged by these guys? And that's just going to go on forever. Let me turn to something else. If you're African American, let me go to the basketball. Let me do that. I'm going to feel comfortable there. I'm not going to feel comfortable in a physics. Oh, can I ever be seen well there? What would I have to do to make it in a domain like that? The identity pressure is so intense in some situations that it itself could explain the patterns that we see of who's in these fields and who's not in these fields. I remember talking to a young white student, woman, who was really good in math in high school, and she comes to Stanford, and she said, I walked by the introductory computer science, and it was so Asian. I just didn't feel like I could. I don't think I can work that hard. What she said. I don't think I can work that hard. So we think people choose fields because of their interests. And I think they do. They start out that way. But pretty soon they read what the experience would be in a field, one field or another. And that's where churn starts to be a decisive factor in their career path. It's not a passing thing. It starts to be a decisive factor. Okay, so we need to be aware that our environments have agency in regard to instantiating churn or not. They have agency, and we need to pay attention to that. The more recent thing that I'm fascinated by, and this comes from just having responsibility for institutions and diversity in institutions, is that let's go up a level. Let's take a university or a corporation or a military unit or a whole program at the institutional level. I think there are a number of things that we're not as aware of that affect a group's fate in those institutions, and that I think is rooted in the kind of psychology that I've been describing here. Often we do a very bad job of socializing people to our institutions. That is, telling them what they're about. What do they offer them? How do you get through them? What's the significance of them? Also, a lot of the experience that students have isn't well structured. They're finding out what to do by talking to their roommates and the kid down the hall. For the most part, they're kind of putting together an agenda that way for themselves, and they lack structure, and these kinds of things put them in a kind of ambiguity. That they experience the institution as having a lot of ambiguity as to what to do. How am I evaluated here? What does this mean? What is my future going to be? At that point of life, I guess I'm thinking especially people coming into college, but the same thing can happen when you're going from junior high school to high school, when you're going from high school to college, when you're joining a new corporation, a new world, a new university. There's a lot of ambiguity. And ambiguity is the opposite of something that would, ambiguity feeds churn. It feeds churn. When you're in an when things are ambiguous to you, you have to consider whether your identity is a factor in that situation. You have to keep that hypothesis alive in your mind. You have to be vigilant to it. Well, maybe my experience here is affected by how people see my identity. I can't be sure that that's not the case. So I have to, like the students in that experiment, the Cohen experiment I described, I don't know. It's just that ambiguity feeds and fuels the churn, the concern about whether my identity. So that politicizes me. I might not be political in my general orientation, but in that kind of situation, I have to start developing a political story, a narrative about what's happening to me in this situation and who these people I'm dealing with are and what they could do. And so it's coming as an adaptation to ambiguity in the context that they're the institutional context that they're coping with. What should I major in? How do you get a good grade? What's important here? I remember coming to graduate school. Is statistics all important? Maybe I should just really focus. Maybe psychology is really all about statistics. I mean, I can remember having that thought that that's what it was really about, sorting through my ambiguity, the ambiguity in this situation. Suppose somebody had taken me before graduate school started and explained to me, here's the deal, man. This is how to think about these things. This is what this is about. To just leap over those years of sorting through ambiguity and give me some, okay. So I looked, at least casually, to find programs, academic programs, where women and minorities were doing as well as men. Just as where does that happen? And one place that was very dramatic to me was Georgia State. I don't know how many of you have heard about that university, but it had an atrocious graduation rate. In the early 2000s, the graduation rate for African American males was 18%. Give you some sense of it. And it wasn't a lot better for other students, in the high 20s, maybe low 30s. So they had to do something. And I'll skip the fascinating narrative. I put this in the book in case you're interested, but of how they got there and the role of the personalities and so on. There was a president who was really of this mind, and there was a faculty member, incredibly effective, Tim Rennick, at doing what I'm about to describe. But here's what they did. They brought, it's no small school, 55,000 students, six campuses. 60% of their students are Pell Grant students, which means that you're coming from a family of four has an income less than $30,000 a year. So these are kids that are really committed, want a higher education, but they're coming from really low-income backgrounds, and they're highly ethnically diverse. So what they do is bring them in 7 weeks before school starts, and they really give you a good sense of what a university is about, which these students otherwise have no sense about, no real grasp of it. Here's what it can offer you. Here are the pathways by which you can get there. And by the way, you're going to also need some financial literacy training because our AI models they use predict that your family will be stretched to pay the tuition at this particular time. And we're going to redesign our financial aid so that it isn't a block grant to you, but it's handed out on the basis of what your emerging needs are. If your car gets broken, come to us. If you can't pay your tuition bill, come to us. If your mother can't pay her rent, come to us. So the money was reallocated in that way. Bit of an honors system, but it nonetheless is allocated in that way. They learn so much about what the resources of the institution, what it takes to get through a course, what courses are going to be challenging, what courses and what you have to do if you're taking a challenging course, and so on and so forth. Then school begins, and they really continue to monitor their performance. So if they blow so much as a quiz in a calculus course, they're going to hear from the support staff, and the support staff is going to say, well, where were you over the weekend? You're taking a course that requires this much time, and you're not giving it anything. So they're really now educating kids as to what is involved in performing well in college. I have a great deal of sympathy for this because I really had to go through this. I describe it in the book personally when I went to college. I went to this huge high school off the south side of Chicago, and great fond memories of high school and so on, but it wasn't academically that strong, and I had no idea how to do college. There were 5,500 students in my high school. I can remember being 13, sitting in the back of an algebra class, just kind of in a coma. Just not way in the back. You're 13. How could you ever relate to this material? So when I got to college, I had fortunately a roommate who modeled good student behavior. And I quit. I was a swimmer. I quit being an athlete, and I thought, I have to, and I just copied him. And then everything turned around. Everything turned around very quickly. A lot of my frustration was, I just had no conception of what was involved in college. I took a French course. I thought that, if you look at your book for 10 minutes, 15 minutes maybe, a couple days a week, I would do it. I thought that. That's what I really believed at the time. So that's what I really needed to succeed there, were the know-hows, the understandings of what's involved, that you get if you maybe come from a family with that where everybody going to college and knew what to do, and there would just be incidentally that kind of socialization to the experiment. So at any rate, through these kinds of processes, there's equal participation of racial and ethnic and gender groups in the STEM fields at Georgia State. And their graduation rate for all four groups is about, that is for Asians, Latinos, African Americans, whites, is about 67% now, which is about as good as any of our big universities can do. And as I say, equal participation. So, okay, that's Georgia State. At Berkeley, in the chemistry college, interesting because I picked them again because that is a college that the graduate program is a college in which the women and minorities do as well as men with regard to the coin of the realm in graduate school, which is publications and progress toward publications. Rudy Mendoza-Denton did a huge study of the physical sciences at Berkeley, their graduate programs, asking this question: do the women and minorities do as well as the men on these on progress toward publication? And as you would expect, the answer is no, they don't, tragically, except in the College of Chemistry. And the College of Chemistry looks a lot like Georgia State. They bring the students in three weeks early, and they say, look, you think it's all about grades because you're coming from an undergraduate program. Grades are just incidental here. It's all about getting into research, and we're going to help you get into research. You're going to talk to three faculty members, and they're going to give you some projects. And then there's going to be a lot of structure in your experience here. You're going to need to turn in a proposal by November the 3rd. And then by March the 4th, we're going to have that research done. And by June 2nd, you're going to have that research submitted for publication somewhere. So you know now that what's expected. You're not in a big ambiguous cloud of what the hell, who's valued here, what performances are important here, what relation, with no structure. All those questions are open, and that openness feeds the need it feeds churn. The need to constantly worry, to some degree, about whether your identity is a factor in this situation. Because historically, it has been a factor. I just can't rationally, in that remembering, forgetting tension, I just can't forget that. And act like, oh, it never happened, never could happen to me. Just trust. Trust is hard. And that lack of structure feeds mistrust. And that structure remedies it. So not only did then Aaron Fisher pick this up and replicated this study across the whole UC system, that in the programs, physical science programs, across all those 10 UCs, where women and minorities do as well as men, are very structured. There's a socialization and a structured a feature to a program that reduces that ambiguity, that toxic ambiguity that is just sort of garden variety ambiguity in the situation, but that fuels these concerns. You go to school, you may or may not be that political. It's probably somewhere in the back of your mind, but when you're there facing that ambiguity, you have to get political. You have to consider the politics of your identity in that situation. You're not, that feature is what's forcing it. And the remedy for it is pretty straightforward. That we need to, let's say universities, but I think the same principles hold for corporations and workplaces and the like, we need to come to the students. So I have a sort of a summary, and then I'll stop. Maybe there'll be some time for questions of kind of the three things that I think are critical in thinking about our experience with individuals, mid-sized situations, and even institutions. The three things are seeing, welcoming, and supporting. Seeing, welcoming, and supporting. And of those three, I think seeing is the most important and the least understood. Seeing means taking the perspective of the actor, of the person in the situation, as opposed to being satisfied with the perspective of an observer, someone outside the situation. Let's say I'm at Georgia State. I've got to fix the graduation rates. I've done this as a provost, and I put it in a great question down, but I've certainly done it. Oh, I'll appoint a committee of really good, smart people, and they'll look at this problem and they'll figure out a solution to it. And they'll come up with some answers. They'll come up with, well, we need to have more financial aid. Maybe we can get some donors in. They would come up with a variety of things that make sense from the observer's perspective. But not so much from they remain blind to what the students are actually experiencing, to what the actors in the situation are experiencing. I think this is a problem in social science and maybe psychology in general. We're insensitive to that distinction between those two perspectives. Stereotype threat is an example of a theory that just takes it's a trick. It's a trick. Just take the actor's perspective. The conventional theory about how stereotypes affect people was that, Gordon Allport, they're hammered into us, and pretty soon we believe them, and then when we're in situations where they're relevant, we enact them. We self-fulfill them. That's a standard on the street story about how stereotypes affect us. It never quite seemed right to me, because the people I knew who were the targets of those stereotypes, I never see them believe them. That just seemed they were haunted by them. They worried about being treated in terms of them. They didn't necessarily believe them. So that takes the actor's perspective. What the actor is experiencing there is not some belief and internalization of it. They're experiencing the fact that I have to read social situations and see whether those stereotypes are in play against me. That's the predicament that I'm in. It's a different perspective. When a kid comes to college, what is that person dealing with? I'm arguing that they're dealing with a lot of ambiguity that could be easily fixed, and that ambiguity can spawn churn in these important ways, and that comes from taking the actor's perspective. And that's what I mean by seeing. It's actually seeing first what the problem is, as opposed to taking this perspective of an outside observer as a sufficient perspective. That can have its value too, but it's not necessarily sufficient, because it doesn't really appreciate how the student experiences the psychology of the actor in the situation. I'm late for meetings. You could impute to me all kinds of internal characteristics that would explain my lateness. But for me, from my standpoint, it's because my babysitter was late. It's because I got in a traffic jam trying to get out of the city and get down to camp. I got a whole different story about that. I'm not saying one is more legitimate, but you can see what I mean by that. That perspective is what, at the level of institutions and at the level of individuals, I think we're missing. What is the experience? What is the experience of the person? Wise people get that. Gil Evans understood what Miles Davis was dealing with. He didn't meet Miles Davis and say, "I'm just colorblind, I'm going to be your friend, man." You could see how insulting that would be. He's going to, from Miles's perspective, the actor's perspective here, he would be missing, if he said that, he would be missing some of the most profound things he has to deal with in life. Just overing them like they don't matter. That's the problem with that, just using that perspective. What he can understand is, no, this guy has got a lot of shit to deal with, and And it is a part of the art that he creates, the great art that he creates, the sound that he has, the tone that he has, is a part of that experience of his. And as soon as he sees that, and Miles sees that he sees that, they're past it. And that's what our institutions have to do a much better job of, is seeing what's going on, taking the time to invest in that. That's where some of the individuals, I think Tim Rennick at Georgia State, he saw it. He had a personal background that helped him sensitize to, if you're a low-income student, here's what life is like. Here's what I'm really dealing with here. And the committee I would have appointed would have, come up with, we need more hours, we need more this, we need more that. It might have cost a lot more. My intentions were good, but I didn't see. That's why I think it's the most important step. The second step is welcoming. This is something we can underappreciate. We think, why should I have to do that? Look, in a diverse society like ours, I'm sorry. There just needs to be a little work, an understanding that our codes, our ways of relating to each other have to welcome each other. Otherwise, when I come into a situation, that hypothesis about the role of my identity is going to be live. I have to be vigilant in this society. And so I need some signal that that you welcome me here, that you think I belong here. Jeff Cohen has a whole book on belonging. And that's at the heart of it. I think that's another Norton book, if I'm not mistaken. Great book dealing with these with this very issue of welcoming. That has to be there. Otherwise, I'm going to be having to be in churn. And then the last thing is, I think, support. We trust people who help us. When I was a kid, the neighbors that came over and helped us prepare our house for a Chicago winter, they were Polish, but I trusted them. I trusted them because, they helped us. They could have a different identity. And that's where I feel very hopeful about it. We're not with regard to building the trust we need for a multiracial, multi-ethnic society to succeed. With regard to that task, I think it's quite accessible. I think we do a lot of it now. What we need to do is take that part of it. I think that's all this work is about, is putting a light on that set of simple, ordinary, down-on-the-ground processes that I think can, if focused on, can take us very far along this line. We tend to think of these problems as rooted in prejudice. And prejudice is horrible. I'm a social psychologist, I'm looking at Marcus Brower out here, who's amazing, beautiful work on that very process. It's a profound process, a part of it. But I think as fundamental as that is this issue of trust. And that is something we really need to raise up and develop as a pathway forward. So I also feel that it's hopeful because anybody can do these things. They're accessible to all of us. Trust is about who shows up, who listens again, and then who provides real help. Those people in our lives, you trust them. That overwhelms huge differences, young and old, black and white, men, women. That passes, that gets over that. Anyway, so with that, I can stop, and maybe there'll be a little time for questions. I don't know where we are time-wise. I think we have some time, maybe a few minutes. Thank you. First one to make a question gets an apple or something like that.
Thank you so much. That was a wonderful talk. One of my questions is about what do you believe the impact of artificial intelligence will be on opportunity gaps for diverse students? And maybe can we leverage that to reduce opportunity gaps?
Wow, that's a good question. I wish I had a thoughtful answer to it. AI is so emergent, and I live in the city where, God, everything, that's all we all talk about is AI. It's the hope of San Francisco sort of coming back as a city. So no, but I do think there can be some leveling components to this as AI moves out into society, and it can make available to certain groups of people things that otherwise would be very hard to have be available. And when you do that, you sort of equal the playing field a little bit. So when I just look out at it with the admittedly profound ignorance I have about AI in general and where it's going, this is one thought that has occurred to me, is that if I can get access to so much information so quickly, and it's disseminated all over the place, what will that, that could compensate a lot for being in a school, for example, that isn't as strong as another school. I see my grandsons who have the good fortune of going to very good schools that I didn't have the good fortune of going to. I see the difference. It's dramatic in the way it socializes people. And if AI can help that kind of experience be more broadly disseminated, then I would want to be hopeful about it. I would try to be hopeful about it. I know we all worry about whether our students are going to cheat, and I got to go give my speech about that to them tomorrow. So I have a speech, which we all have. Maybe you can use it for research, but if I find that you let that thing write the paper for you, then you're gonna pay for it. That's kind of where we're at this point, it seems. But I think it does have some potential to disseminate information and education in ways that haven't been possible before that.
Hi. Oh, thank you very much for your talk. Oh, over here.
Ah, there we are.
Yeah, I was curious when you mentioned, how you try to use diversity trainings to kind of reduce the gaps between chairs and data network, and given the finding that a lot of the effects of diversity trainings don't last more than 24 hours, and like you said, it could backfire with reactance of participants and so on. Do you think they could possibly be modified or replaced with something that could foster that seeing and welcoming and supporting that you mentioned?
That's a great question, and I'd like to believe the answer is yes. I was disheartened by that experience. It wasn't a publishable experience because it was done primarily in pre-testing. We just couldn't get any effect from those things, or they were backfiring on us. And I think that mirrors our larger experience with them, that they can elevate identity to such a degree in my consciousness that I start to churn, and all parties start to churn and get more uncomfortable with each other. You're going to see me as racist, and I'm going to see you. And what am I supposed to do to prevent that? People can feel trapped in light of the processes I'm outlining. They can feel trapped in a situation like that. That their decency and goodness can't be seen. Their intentions can't be seen or can't be appreciated. So what do? You avoid the hell out of it. You just stay away. You see, if you have any choice in the matter, you stay away. And if you have to go, you kind of sulk. So I think out of the best of intentions, but out of an inadequate understanding of the psychology of the experience, that hasn't been as promising as a way to go. There are times when I believed in it. I definitely have to say that, but I think I've arrived at a point where I have these concerns about it. And I do think a more fundamental approach to these things could help deal with it. In that kind of training, it doesn't even have to focus so much on identity as it does on the value of community. There is a construct out here. I'm afraid it's maybe a little anachronistic, but the community that was formed, that created American Civil Rights Movement was called the beloved community. It was rooted in a kind of Judeo-Christian ethic and an imitation of Gandhian, the revolution in India, that Gandhi, the nonviolent revolution in India. But it was a very inclusive movement at the outset, and it's that part of the movement that created the Civil Rights Law that changes most of the Civil Rights law. There's the two Civil Rights Acts, the Fair Housing Acts, the desegregation, school desegregation, Supreme Court decisions, all came out of that image of a community. And I think that kind of image of a community is valuable as training. It doesn't put you on the spot with regard to your identity. It teaches you to see full humanity and potential in difference. In difference. That would be an alternative to the standard approaches which orbit around identity pressures so much and can amplify them. So I think there is an alternative. I think it is rooted in the American creed. All men are created equal on inalienable rights. There's a book that I gave to my kids and grandkids saying the greatest sentence in history. It's by Walter Isaacson. A little thin book, and it's about that sentence in the Declaration of Independence by Thomas Jefferson, which is the root of the American experiment. That root where we have the intellectual framework with which to accomplish this kind of a society, and that I think is worth our educational institutions taking responsibility to educate us about that. That's what it's about. It's not about just each group in conflict. It is about, you can read that language. The Civil Rights Movement, Martin Luther King, is all based on that sentence.
We're out of time. Let's thank Dr. Steele one more time.
Thank you. Good luck.
That concludes this morning's session. Next up is pies at 10:15.